Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today, we are going to continue our reading of The Bridge of the Gods by F.H. Balch. Our last episode, we began our reading of the story of our protagonist, Cecil, the Reverend, in New England. And we will be continuing that story today. Since last episode was rather long, today's will be rather short. We're going to just read Chapter 3, A Darkened Fireside. Her way is parted from my way, out of sight, beyond light. At what goal may we meet? Dante Rossetti. Ruth was much worse in the evening, but at last, after Cecil had watched at her side till a late hour, she sank into a troubled sleep. Then the old Indian servant insisted on taking his place at the sufferer's bedside, for she saw that he was much worn by the labors of the day and by anxiety for his wife. At first he refused, but she was a skilled nurse, and he knew that the invalid would fare better in her hands than his own. So at last he consented on condition that she would call him if his wife grew worse. The woman promised, and he withdrew into the library, where a temporary bed had been made for him. At the door, he turned and looked back. His wife lay with closed eyes and flushed face amid the white pillows. The robe over her breast stirred with her difficult breathing, and her head turned now and then from side to side, while she uttered broken, feverish words. By her sat the swarthy nurse, watching her every movement and ready with observant eye and gentle touch to minister to all her needs. A yearning tenderness and pity came into his gaze. Poor child, he thought. If I could only make her well and happy. If I could only bring her dead lover back to life. How gladly would I put her in his arms and go away forever. And it seemed to him, in some dim way, that he had wronged the poor sufferer, that he was to blame for her sorrow. He went on into the library. A lamp was burning on the table. A Hebrew Bible and a copy of Homer lay beside it. Along the walls were arranged those heavy and ponderous tomes in which the theology of the age was wont to clothe itself. He seated himself at the table and took up his Homer, for he was too agitated to sleep. But it was in vain that he tried to interest himself in it. The rhythm had lost its music, the thought its power. It was in vain that he tried to forget himself in the reply of Achilles or the struggle over the body of a Patroclus. Hawthorne tells us that a person of artistic temperament may at a time of mental depression wander through the Roman galleries and see nothing in the finest masterpieces of Raphael or Angelo. The grace is gone from the picture, the inspiration from the marble. The one is a meaningless collection of colors, the other a dull effigy carved in stone. Something of this mood was on Cecil tonight. Irresponsive to the grand beauty of the poem, he felt only its undertone of heartache and woe. It is like human life, he thought, as he listlessly turned the pages. It is bright on the surface, but dark and terrible with pain below. What a black mystery is life. What bitter irony of justice. Hector is dragged at Achilles' chariot wheel, and Paris goes free. Helen returns to her home in triumph, while Andromache is left desolate. Did Homer write in satire, and is the Iliad but a splendid mockery of justice, human and divine? Or is life so sad that every tale woven of it must needs become a tragedy? He pondered the gloomy puzzle of human existence long that night. At length his brain grew overweary, and he slept sitting in his chair, his head resting on the pages of the open book. How long he slept he knew not, but he awoke with a start to find a hand laid on his shoulder, and the tall figure of the Indian woman standing beside him. He sprang up in sudden fear. "Is she worse?" he cried. But the woman, with that light, noiseless step, that mute stolidity, so characteristic of her race, had already glided to the door, and there was no need for her to answer, for already his own apprehensions had replied. He was in the room almost as soon as she. His wife was much worse, and hastening through the night to a neighboring farmhouse, he roused its inmates, dispatched a messenger for the physician, and returned, accompanied by several members of the neighbor's family. The slow moments dragged away like years as they watched around her. It seemed as if the doctor would never come. To the end of his life, Cecil never forgot the long-drawn agony of that night. At length, their strained hearing caught the quick tread of horses' hoofs on the turf without. The doctor, came simultaneously from the lips of Cecil and the watchers. The doctor, there was hope in the very name. How eagerly they watched his face. As he bent over the patient, it was a calm, self-contained face, but they saw a shadow flit over it, a sudden, almost imperceptible change of expression that said, "Death," as plainly as if he had spoken it. They could do nothing, he said, nothing but wait for the end to come. How the moments lingered. Sometimes Cecil bent over the sufferer, with every muscle quivering to her paroxysms. Sometimes he could endure it no longer, and went out into the cool night air, or into the library, where, with the mere mechanical instinct of a student, he picked up a book, reading a few lines in it, then throwing it aside. Yet wherever he was, he felt her sufferings as acutely as when standing by her side. His whole frame was in keenest sympathy with hers, his whole being full of pain. So sharp were his sensations that they imparted an abnormal vigor to his mind. Every line his eyes met in reading stood out on the page with wonderful distinctness. The words seemed pictorial, and his mind grasped abstruse propositions or involved expressions with marvelous facility. He noted it and remembered afterward that he thought at the time how curious it was that his tortured sympathies should give him such startling acuteness of perception. The slow night waned. The slow dawn crept over the eastern hills. Cecil stood with haggard eyes at the foot of the bed, watching the sleeper's face. As the daylight brightened, blending with the night of the still burning lamps, he saw a change come over her countenance. The set face relaxed. The look lost its wildness. A great hope shone in his hollow eyes. "She is getting better. She is coming out of her sufferings," he whispered to the doctor. "She will be out of her sufferings very soon," he replied sadly. And then Cecil knew that the end was at hand. Was it because the peace, the profound serenity which sometimes is the prelude of death, filling her being, penetrated his, that he grew so strangely calm? An inexpressible solemnity came to him as he looked at her, and all his agitation left him. His face grew very sweet and calm, and full of peace. Her eyes met Cecil's, and there was in them something that seemed to thank him for all his goodness and patience, something that was both benediction and farewell. Her lips moved, but she was past the power of speech, and only her eyes thanked him in a tender, grateful glance. The sun's edge flashed above the horizon, and its first rays fell through the uncurtained window full upon her face. She turned toward them, smiling faintly, and her face grew tenderly, radiantly beautiful, as if on that beam of sunshine the spirit of her dead lover had come to greet her from the sea. Then the sparkle died out of her eyes, and the smile faded from her lips. It was only a white, dead face that lay there, bathed in golden light. A moment later, a moment after, Cecil left the house with swift footsteps and plunged into the adjacent wood. There, under a spreading oak, he flung himself prone upon the earth and buried his face in his hands. A seething turmoil of thoughts swept his mind. The past rose before him like a panorama. All his married life rushed back upon him, and every memory was regret and accusation. "I might have been kinder to her. I might have been better," he murmured, while the hot tears gushed from his eyes. "I might have been so much better to her," he repeated over and over. He, whose whole thought had been to shut up his sorrow in his own heart and show her only tenderness and consideration. By and by he grew calmer and sat up, leaning against the tree and looking out into vacancy with dim eyes that saw nothing. His heart was desolate, emptied of everything. What was he to do? What was he to set before himself? He had not loved her, but still she had been a part of his life. With what was he to fill it now? As he sat there, depressed and troubled, a strange thing happened. He was looking, as had been said, blindly into vacancy. It may have been an optical illusion. It may have been a mere vagary born of an overwrought brain. But a picture formed before him. In the distance, toward the west, he saw something that looked like a great arch of stone, a natural bridge, rugged with crags and dark with pine. Beneath it, swept a wide blue river, and on it wild horsemen were crossing and recrossing, with plumed hair and rude lances. Their faces were Indian, yet of a type different from any he had ever seen. The bridge was in the heart of a mighty mountain range. On either side rose sharp and lofty peaks, their sides worn by the action of water in some remote age. These details he noted, as in a dream. Then the strangeness of it all burst upon him. Even as it did so, the vision dissolved. The bridge wavered and passed away. The mountain peaks sank in shadow. He leaped to his feet and gazed eagerly. A fine mist seemed passing before his sight. Then he saw the reach of hill and woodland, with the morning light resting upon it. While the vision faded, he felt springing up within him an irrepressible desire to follow it. A mysterious fascination seized him, a wild desire to seek the phantom bridge. His whole being was swayed, as by a sudden supernatural power, toward the west, whence the vision had passed. He started forward eagerly, then checked himself in bewilderment. What could it mean? In the 19th century, one similarly affected would think it meant a disordered brain. But in the 17th, when statesmen like Cromwell believed in dreams and omens, and Rouet, like Monmouth, carried charms in their pockets, these things were differently regarded. The Puritan ministry, whose minds were imbued with the gloomy supernaturalism of the Old Testament on which they fed, were especially men to whom anything resembling an apparition had a prophetic significance. And Cecil Gray, though liberal beyond most New England clergymen, was liable by the keenness of his susceptibilities and the extreme sensitiveness of his organization to be influenced by such delusions, if delusions they be. So he stood awed and trembling, questioning within himself, like some seer to whom a dark and uncertain revelation has been made. Suddenly, the answer came. The Lord hath revealed his will unto me, and shown me the path wherein I am to walk, he murmured in a hushed and stricken tone. Ruth was taken from me, that I might be free to go where he should send me. The vision of the Indians, and the bridge which faded into the west, and the strange desire that was given me to follow it, show that the Lord has another work for me to do. And when I find the land of the bridge and of the wild people I saw upon it, then will I find the mission that God has given me to do. Lord God of Israel, I thank thee. Thou hast shown me the way, and I will walk in it, though all its stones be fire, and its end be death. He stood a moment with his bowed head, communing with his God. Then he returned to his lonely home. The friends whose kindly sympathies had brought them to the house of mourning wondered at the erect carriage, the rapt, exalted manner of the man. His face was pale, almost as pale as that within the darkened room, but his eyes shone, and his lips were resolutely set. A little while, and that determined face was all sorrowful and pitying again. as he bent over the still, cold body of his dead. And with that rather sobering end to chapter 3, we end our reading for today. Obviously, that premonition, if we can call it that, was rather prescient given the title of the book and given the events that are about to unfold as Cecil ventures his way out west. Next time we will continue, and I believe we will be finishing book 1. Unless there is a 6th chapter that I have forgotten about. Nope. Just the 4th and 5th that I was expecting. Perfect. And in that case, I will see you all next week. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your night. Thank you, everyone.